Hey guys, this is the first time I've gone live in a while, and I'm actually supposed to be joining Positive Talks, but we're having technical difficulties, so we're going to try it the opposite way, where I start the live and he joins me. Let's see if this works. See if it will let you join. Look at that.
That works. Maybe Instagram is mad at me today.
We had to do an inception, switch around. So I'm hosting you, hosting me. I
absolutely love it.
Out. It's good to see you.
Yeah, same. How have you been?
Good, really good. Yeah, this is the first time I'm jumping on anything live since the book launch. So yeah, it's kind of a weird feeling, but exciting. And right as we were trying to figure out technology, I went and picked up the package came. It's the first time ever I will see the hardcover. So it's the book crack, the first time.
Opening it up. I love that.
Yeah. It's so soft. It's like my baby was just born in front of you.
I'm glad I got to hear that
product placement person and put it right here.
That's perfect. I wish Instagram would do stuff like the flipped around, and because every single time I wear a shirt with the message, it's read it backwards, guys.
You almost have to get them made. I know somebody who does it actually with his hats, but gets it done reversed so that it reads properly when he looks at himself in the mirror and when these things. Yeah, I guess I could get a dummy book with the. That would be a lot more effort than probably necessary.
You just have to sit in front of a mirror and have it kind of flipped.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, well, I'll get you this video back, but I'll let you, let you host your show on my channel, and then we'll figure out how you can post it later.
Perfect. Yeah, I think once you go to save it on your page, it actually gives you the option now to kind of make me an administrator of it, and then it shows on both of our pages now, which I like that feature. I think yesterday's was the first time I saved a video that way, so Brianna actually has it on her page too, so that might work.
Perfect. This feature was invented for our exact technical issues today.
They knew it was coming. Awesome. Well, I know that you and I had done a live before, and I think that we actually kind of talked on this topic because this is something that you're really passionate about, and I know that I've had some friends here recently that could probably really use a book to connect in this area, because I think that if you haven't experienced loss yet, that is something that it's not easy to get through. But I know that your story, you've done a lot of amazing work after your loss, and you've gone a long way from that. And I know that since we talked, you got to travel, which I think was a really cool experience for you. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. First, I'm just going to pause because I noticed that you said, your friends will get through grief. And if I can kind of hijack the system and speed anybody up in their life learning, you're not going to get through it. It's going to be there always. It's going to be something you honor every day. And that's kind of the point of the book. And it's a way that we're definitely wired to think, it's something that we get over, we get through. We go to a place where it no longer hurts to honor what and who we've lost. And I'm kind of the bearer of bad news. Kind of our parents had those certain conversations with us around holidays and who brings us money for our teeth, to kind of say, that's not all, that's not real. Grief is something that you wake up every day for the rest of your life and you do honor. And I think in finally just acknowledging that is where I really started to get my life back and be able to, live with it. And that came from a lot of experimenting and a lot of just taking people's offerings and seeing what actually worked for me and then like putting it into real life experience, and then of those experiments become sort of the basis of the book. But yeah, I got to travel a lot last year, as I sort of wrote this, and it sort of was forming inside of me. In the book, I kind of reference in the epilogue, like it was almost like having a baby. Like I knew it was coming and I knew it was growing, but like, you know, every time I sat down to write it, it just wasn't like this like movie moment where I could like go in a coffee shop and it was just like being written. And then finally, like in November, I was like, when a woman's pregnant, like nobody says that she's procrastinating. Like when the baby comes, and everybody needs to like leave me alone. And I was down in Baja at a retreat with some like great friends, and I thought this has got to be where it finally all just like comes out, and just not the way it happens. And I ended up going to London to take some time to grieve myself actually, and and that's where my water broke. And the full like first draft of this book happened after like I went to all those places last year. I mean, I got to be in Palm Springs, Austin, Greece, Italy. You know, I got to experience all these places, and I just always picture myself like writing, you know, in all these places. And although I was writing, and a lot of that writing was for my other book, my memoir, you know, so much of this one was just forming. And then it was born in London, and kind of like what happened today when I left LA last week, I missed the mail. So other people had seen my book before me,
Oh,
but it was kind of magical because I landed in London and it had just been delivered. And so I got to open it like right where I actually wrote it. And I was like, oh, okay, well, if I believed in everything happens for a reason, I might, you know, fall into that trap. But yeah, I'm very fortunate to have been able to safely navigate traveling and you know, have that autonomy and that ability to kind of do what I do and try to make impact while traveling.
yeah. And I I've definitely experienced loss in a lot of different ways. And when it came to the lessons that I kind of took away from things, like I lost my grandfather first, and there was a lot of moments that I wish that I had done before because he was sick and I knew that, and I chose to live states away when I did have the opportunity to kind of stay closer to him and kind of say all the things that I wanted to say. And for me, that was a really important lesson because the healing process for that took so much longer than some of the other losses I experienced because my brain just kept cycling around the things that I wish I'd gotten to say. And then, like 4 years later, lost my best friend that I think this would be more similar to kind of like losing a brother or a sister because
Mhm.
you don't expect to lose them. Like you think that it's going to be a forever thing. You're going to grow old together. And in that loss, because he was my best friend and because I'd lost my grandfather and he was one of the people who helped me get through that, I learned to say everything that I'm feeling about someone. Like I let all my friends know that I love them. I don't hold on to angry feelings. I let them out and tell people just because I don't want to wake up one day and find out that I went to bed angry at someone and that was my last experience.
Mhm.
And like I went
I mean,
through
I
all
just
the
really
grief.
want to commend you on that because, like, you know, learning that off the top with loss, I mean, sometimes that takes a lot longer for us all to realize. And that's definitely the way I try to live my life every day. And, you know, I'm a fully flawed feeling human being. So I navigate it with as much grace and integrity as I can. But it is, you know, such a big lesson that like you said with the first loss of your grandfather, it's almost like your body does and your mind does everything it can to not accept learning anything or accepting like the death itself. It's like this full on denial, you know. And I know that, you know, in the stages of grief, obviously denial is the first one. I talk a lot in the book about how for me all the stages were like more of a swirl of like all of them at different times and navigating that. But it's funny because as you're telling me like about those losses, I I like literally was getting the feeling that I've always gotten. I mean, I've been in the grief arena for 13 years. Like, you know, that I lost my brother to cancer, found my father after suicide, and then, you know, I'm trying to get myself back up in the world. I was in a bad accident with my dear friend, and she didn't survive. And the the energy that people would bring to me when they found out somebody else had passed and they were trying to support somebody, I would just freeze. Or if somebody shared that they'd lost somebody too, I would freeze. And I kind of felt this like other side of me going like, dude, you've been in the grief arena for 13 years. Like, you should be this shining light that can help people. You should know what to say. You should know like what condolences. And you see that old mindset of all those shoulds, you know, but, and that freeze, that like uncomfortableness of whenever someone shares, and I'm like, because my honest thought is like, you're like, you're fucked. Like, you know, it's going to take a while, and like, you know, like loss is its own beast, and you have to get to know yourself every day for like, you know, at least the next year, and all these, you know, this swirl of feelings of how to support someone. So finally, thank God this baby was born, because now I can just be like, here, I'm going to stay with you for the next year. Please just stay compassionate, stay kind, you know, and stay curious, like really curious about getting to know yourself and being able to do it. I mean, I'm definitely equal parts find the funny and honor the journey. You know, I have to have fun with this because it's such a harsh reality in my life. I never intended to be, you know, 30 years and I've suffered such major trauma and losses. And the only way like I kind of want to step forward with this in this book is to say like, you know, there's this other thing called real life grief for real life people, where you're going to have to take what's happened and everything you're feeling, and you're going to have to really be kind with yourself about experimenting week to week about what does and doesn't work. And that's why I came up with the idea of like these offerings, like it's not like a how to do grief, because like that stuff just made me allergic, you know. And it's not so far in the future that it's like you have to have been through your grief to get something out of the book. It's literally like, hey, I'm your new friend, welcome to Hogwarts. Usually I am the non-fictional boy who lived, but in this case I'm just like Ron or Hermione, and I'm like willing to go with you, and there's going to be some dark stuff, you know, but I'll be your friend now for the next year, and you'll have this book. And it's sort of, you know, that's why I subtitled it From a Friend Who Gets It, because I can be that friend who gets it for other people. If I try in my normal life to be that for everybody who loses someone, there's not much of me left, obviously. So it just felt like, you know, this natural transition to sort of gift this book out there and make it sort of like the go-to gift. I remember being like surrounded by flowers that were dying, just like my loved ones had, and that smell is still to this day like such a trigger. And I'm so grateful that people fed us in those harsh times, but there's only so much room for casseroles and lasagnas in one freezer, you know. And then the condolences, I mean, people really just show up in weird ways. Like death brings out, you know, some very helpful things and some very unhelpful things that you actually have to spend more time understanding and unraveling than if they just hadn't given a condolence or like, you know, said anything at all. So I just figure like in the midst of that noise, if this can be some sort of new go-to gift, you know, that you just send to someone and you get to be with them for a year when they're experiencing loss indirectly in this way that like lets them get to know themselves, and is a reminder. And look, we've proven that it can sit in your house and it doesn't look like garbage, you know.
It looks great.
Yeah, I know it's really weird to be like kind of like joking and happy and talking about grief, but I kind of made a promise with myself that, you know, I've obviously done a lot of mental health advocacy. I've done a lot of advocacy in the brain tumor space in memory of my brother, and I really, the only way I can move forward with this and sort of being this grief guy is if I can find a way to acknowledge everything I've been through, have serious and, you know, honor other people's journeys with them, but also maintain sort of like my energy and why like I like to be here, you know. So yeah, it's a weird juxtaposition, but life grief, like grief and real life grief, it's always a mix, you know, laughing hysterically or crying, or you know, it's almost the same thing at a certain point. So yeah, today is a day where I get to like very happily talk about my grief, which is rare. And so I'm glad that we figured out the technology and that we're doing that.
It's that's the thing about going live. You never know what you're gonna get, and it's just like it is what it is. You got to keep going. I
Seriously. Yeah.
Something that like made me like realize. So we talk about like ourselves and the loss, and it's obviously something that's external that is now missing from our lives.
Mm.
But like the thing is, like, we're always whole, but I love to look at ourselves as like a piece of energy. And when you are attached to someone that is love, like you love
Mm.
someone and lose someone, I honestly feel like part of our energy is like having to renegotiate where it sits in our body. And when our bodies are just so attached to another human being, especially someone you've allowed yourself to be extremely vulnerable with and let walls down,
Mm-hmm.
it's after that loss, that energy, that loss that you feel internally, that your body just hurts, is
Mm-hmm.
because that energy that was so shifted to one specific person,
Yeah.
now it's still there. And I think that the reworking of that energy into yourself and allowing it to be like renewed, because it's not like you
Mm-hmm.
can just take it and move it over here and give it to
Yeah.
somebody else.
It's like
It,
basic, like I'm thinking back to science, you know, like energy cannot be created or destroyed as you say that. And you know, it's exactly what you're saying, especially with grief and love. Like that energy does have to be used in some way. And whether it's constructive or deconstructive to your life, does become your choice at a certain point. Once you learn, once you spend a little bit of time, like I call it my hope monster, but like, you know, once you spend a little bit of time and you learn, you know, when it needs to be fed and, you know, all the sort of gremlin rules of like having a new little monster in your life. But like, it's so true. It has to at the very best just switch forms, you know, that energy like that you're talking about. And I think some people get stuck expecting and hoping, you know, that energy to just leave. And I'm with you there, where it's, you know, that's what I say, it's like every day that energy is a part of everything that I do. You know, I wish and spent 10 years destructively hoping I could fix it or, you know, just get rid of it. But at a certain point, it's, yeah, exactly what you're saying, you know, at least from my perspective. You know, I'm not, you know, an academic studier of grief. I know that most people would say that I've had enough experience in person and in the lab, but that is one thing I always want to show up, as always, as I did in the mental health space and continue to, just as a peer, as like another person who's been through it and a perspective. And, you know, this, none of what I found, or none of these experiments are based on my own like academic research. They're just straight out of the arena of life, just like the real, like doing it day to day. And a lot of it is standing on the shoulders of really cool giants. And I've sort of acted like a creator and a curator of, you know, the grief stuff that I could gather, you know, and then gift back and sort of plant seeds. And if you want to learn more about that, then maybe read this person's book. But, you know, this is sort of the experiment for this week. So I'm curious where, like for instance, with your first loss, I'm so curious, and I hope it's okay to like ask about your grief. But with the loss of your grandfather, which you said was your first at the beginning, where are you at with that, with that love and that energy that sat in your body and that, you know, that connection?
for me, there's definitely the mindset of he was the person who loved and supported me through every dream decision I made. So if I had a dream, he found ways to be supportive. And I haven't really found that in a lot of people. And for me, like that's moments where I sit and talk to him by myself. But it doesn't hurt anymore. Like it's not, I'm not going to say it doesn't hurt at all. It's just that intense hurt that I used to feel when my brain would remember he's gone, because I think that we get distracted from our grief, and then it hits really hard when you remember the reality that this person's not here anymore. For me, like now, when I remember he's gone, it's more of a peace that I feel. And that's when I just choose to talk to him. If I'm like surrounded by people, I'll talk to him inside of my head. If I'm by myself, I will just verbally speak to him. And I honestly do feel like a lot of my life is still very much so guided by the wisdom that he shared with me. And I've gotten to a point where I honestly do believe that every time someone is gone from this earth, like we were saying, energy isn't gone. I do believe that that energy now joins the rest of us in the world. And I think that he is guiding everyone he's touched in his lifetime. And for a while, I think the hardest thing for me was I felt like I was the only one grieving, because the rest of my family just started operating on normal very quickly. I was in college and I failed an entire semester. I could not hang out with friends. It felt fake, and it was really hard. But now I realize that I can start the conversations with family members about the loss, and I'm getting a lot more from people, which made me feel a lot more at ease that more people than just me missed him. So I think it's just been like the process of getting comfortable with being able to speak to all the people I needed to speak to, as well as speaking to him and myself, because I really do feel like there's a big part of me that I just thought was missing. It was almost like someone just cut off a limb. But it was just realizing that, yes, he's missing externally, but internally I am still whole. And there's just a part of me that was just very attached to him. And I need to, in my head, I just think of like water kind of cycling through and slowly grabbing that energy and recycling it through me to be used in everything that I'm doing as a person today. And just enjoying
that. I'm like smiling a little bit, but it's this thing, and it kind of happened last time when we talked about mental health, or whenever I talk about mental health with someone, where I'm kind of smiling and nodding, because there's that little part of me, that little monster in me, my hope monster, I call it, but where my grief lives, that thinks all the things you're saying were just me. And like you said, like I was the only one who felt that way. And I haven't heard someone bring up in such a long time that idea of when you sort of get distracted, and then those moments where like your grief, remembering the loss of someone you loved and that they're actually physically gone, like it stupefies you, like it stuns you. It's like you're hitting the deck and everybody's like, what's going on with you? That loved one passed away months ago or years ago, or whatever they're saying, and you're like, yeah, but it just hit me in such a real way right in this moment, and it's curdling around my rib cage, and it's like in my body literally, and I can't believe I live in a world where they don't exist. And it's just so weird, because it's almost like, and I do have experience with PTSD because of what I've been through, but it's very similar, where it's almost like a flashback and you're being completely overtaken, for a moment. And if you don't know to acknowledge that or to expect that, that can be very alarming. I know for me, it sometimes felt like I was almost having some sort of, mental break, like it's just, how can you not know that the deaths that have occurred in your life have happened? Like how can you be relearning this in this moment, and I'll have the most amazing dreams, and I wake up and it's like there's this moment, and that's why I always say this, honor the journey. And it's Grief Club starts today and it ends never. that's the hard part. And, you know, that re-honoring every day. I wake up from those dreams sometimes, and there's this minute where, because my dad and my brother and my friend were in the dreams, that I'm like, oh, we're all good. We're like, you know, and I've totally forgotten. And then I have to take that minute with myself and be like, all right, hey, buddy. So I have some things, like, you know, I kind of have to tell you and bring you back into your consciousness. And it would be astounding, I think, for people to know how many times in my life I have had to re-break my own heart upon waking or upon being triggered, or, you know, and that's the thing that I just have to keep hitting home. And it's true in everything that you said, and it's true of everything that I know personally, is that, you know, grief is like that constant process, you know, and it's a club that nobody really gets out of. So it's weird that we don't talk about it more and we don't acknowledge it more, but there is so much we can do on our own to like be aware of that, you know, in those moments. And, you know, I had a long time, even with, you know, being such a mental health advocate after losing my dad to suicide, you know, and then dealing with my own grief, where even with medical professionals and people that I really trusted, I was constantly trying to like navigate, well, what's grief, or like healthy, normal grief, and what would be considered maybe like depression or anxiety, or, you know, something that I might go to a doctor for, you know. So that balance of knowing how much of your life is like normal, healthy, no, I really loved, I showed up fully in the world and I lost something, you know, and navigating that versus, you know, when it becomes more of something where you want to check in and look at your mental health. So it's such a beast, honestly. And I, you know, maybe I should have called the book The Grief Beast, you know, to my hope monster and my grief beast, but it really is. And that's why I wrote it in a way where it is this week to week guide, where you just take on one experiment and just see, you know, if it's something that leads to some sort of awareness or action that helps you navigate that balance that we're talking about. Because it just does keep coming back in waves. And I can tell by the way that you're nodding, that you know that, and you're good. And then you smell their perfume or their cologne, or, you know, for me, every time it rains, there's a bit of a moment. Like, there's just certain things with each event. And, you know, again, for me personally, obviously, two of the deaths that I experienced that I was physically present for, I was physically present for all three, actually. But my brother's death to cancer was expected as can be. And you kind of talked about that at the beginning. And I just want to let you know that, like you, when my mom told me it looked like it was going to be my brother's last 24 hours, I went to work that day. I laughed. Ooh. And it still gets me, but, you know, there's just you cannot pre-grieve. Your brain, when you truly love somebody, is not going to let you pre-run the scenario where they're really, really, really gone. Like, it's not over till it's over. And like, that's just why we love our favorite movies and books. And, you know, that's why we're addicted to story, because it's like, no, it's not over till it's over. And who would I have been as a brother, and who would I have been within my own self, if I didn't think there was a miracle still possible until like the moment that they said that he was gone. And that thinking, I mean, even he had terminal brain cancer, and I was a very smart kid, you know, at the time, thinking about going into pre-med at, you know, one of the top universities in Canada. And I still just had this, you know, I gotta believe it's not over till it's over. So, you know, like, that pre-grief is a totally different thing. And then it begins. And sometimes, like I said, we can feel so stupid about our grief, like, as if even when we sort of knew that we were eventually going to grieve someone, when there's a terminal illness, you know, which I weirdly call now, with my life experience, sort of like a beautiful death, when you do get that time, you know, and both people are aware, and you can sort of prepare for it in some ways. But then in these other cases, like I said, both the other deaths that I experienced, my friend and my father, were just so unexpected. There was no way to prepare. I found out the moment that I found out. And, you know, and every day from there was just this constant, you know, battle in the arena of like, how much of this can I really honor, and get through. And yeah, I just loved what you said there. And I I just want to normalize like everything that you said and brought up, because it was all part of your own process, and because you were willing to learn, you know, what to do with the energy after losing someone, you've come to all these conclusions, and they don't have to work for anyone else. They only have to work for you. So anything that's in my book that doesn't work for you, toss it. Like I literally write in the book, I will be the first. Hey, how cool, there's a window behind me. I'll be the first to open the window and help you rip that page out and get rid of it. If it doesn't serve you, if it's not really going to help with your grief, then like that's not why I wrote the book. Like that's not why I'm kind of showing up right now, you know? So it's that encouragement of we have this thing where we want to fix each other, and it's because we love each other, but like, you know, when someone else talks about loss or grief, there's this thing where you want to fix and you want to tell them it's going to be okay, but there's this whole other world where we allow them to honor it, and we just sit with them in that uncomfortable space, and as they come to conclusions that serve them or don't serve them, we support them in that way, you know, and we keep having the conversations, but it's that need to, you know, to bookend something that I really think as we start to get away from, you know, and we just give people the space to have literal grief experiments, you know, get in the lab with your own life. I think that's where things really shift, and you can really see how much of your grief energy, how much it can serve you, where it can help others, and how much of it just like needs your love. And that's okay, and that's now part of your life. And you know, that's just something that, again, I keep overusing it, but honor. And I do spell honor with a U, everybody, because not only because I'm originally Canadian, but as I say in the book, I do think honor is more of an our thing than an or thing, especially when it comes to grief. So I used that British Canadian spelling. And the book was written in London, so, you know, I can't disappoint the Queen.
Love it. Yeah, I love kind of what you touched on about like when it comes to the people around us seeing us grieve, they just want to help us end that pain.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is something that we all have to be aware of standing on the outside, is you can't end it. And if you try to end it, and then if the person in front of you starts doing what you're telling them to do, you're stopping their ability to heal in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I took a seminar and they actually talked about like, what's the first thing you do when you hear like a baby cry? And it's shh, shh. You
Mm-hmm.
want them to stop. And that's the way we've been trained our entire life. Like we want the pain to stop. We want it to end. And unfortunately, when it comes to grieving, like you have to go through the motions. And like for me, like the first time that I like really burst was like when because I found out that my granddad died in the middle of 600 new freshmen standing around me at an orientation for my college. And my dad would not stop calling my phone. And my dad and I are not close. So I was like, there's got to be a reason he's calling me. And I just like collapsed in the middle of all those people. And I didn't cry until like my boss, who was a school counselor at the school, came to my dorm room and she was rubbing my back and she's like, let it out. And like, because my brain was saying, shh, shh, don't do it. Don't cry. Like, you're not supposed to do that. You're an adult male. Like, you're not supposed to cry. And to have someone just say, let it out, like, that just opened the gates for me to just let it out. And that's what I've told myself since then, and what I will always tell other people. And I actually did a grief room on Clubhouse where we talked about losing anything, not just people, jobs, relationships.
Such a good point. I will stop and say, like, grief, I say it in I never want to define grief for anyone else. That's like one of my main things. Just like I never wanted to define what masculinity or mental health were, like in my advocacy work there. But like, you know, you define grief. What I personally define grief as is the loss of anything meaningful and the process that follows. Because a lot of people, and I've noticed so much during the pandemic and so much during COVID, it's the first time in my life where I'm like nodding and laughing, and people are like, I just don't know what I'm going through. And I'm like, hey, the grief guy, you're grieving. You're grieving the loss of so many meaningful things and what you expected and how your life to be. You're grieving, you know, that your job isn't what it was 2 years ago, that your life isn't, that we can't just connect and be together. I mean, that's all grief. And we've been collectively grieving. I get goosebumps because I really do feel connected to so many people right now, because it's palpable, the grief of, even, you know, I literally changed the writing of this in the introduction, but we now live in what I call a pandemic possible world. You know, we did the same thing with the pandemic that we're talking about people did with us with their condolences. When is it going to end, and how do we fix it, and how do we make it go away? How do we get back life the way we knew it before? You know, that's all we were focused on. And it's the exact same thing as a death in the family, this honoring, this getting used to your new normal. You know, it becomes a death possible world, a pandemic possible world. And it's funny, as you said, like you were getting those calls, like I always think of my parents' generation saying, like, where were you when Kennedy was shot? And like, I think in our, like, you know, in our learnings, like for us, it's like, where were you when you found out death was permanent? Like that death was real, that you couldn't reverse, that you couldn't get them back, that you couldn't perfect this moment. Like, where were you when you really learned for the first time that grief is real? And you know, it really is, you know, for lack of a better word, a fucking beast, you know, like that moment. And sometimes we don't get it to be planned or in private. You know, sometimes obviously it's very surprising. Sometimes it's very traumatic. So there is no, I would never try to even write a one size fits all grief book. You know, it's just, it's wild. And it's funny because as you were saying that too, I remember at my brother's funeral, which, you know, it wasn't the first death, but it was the first major death. And, you know, we had, because my family, half my family is Portuguese Catholic, we did half of the days open casket Portuguese Catholic, and then half the days to my mother's English Irish side closed. And my brother was a bit of a rock star. He really was. He was the nicest kid on earth, the funniest kid on earth, and he had cancer for 4 years in a small town. So, you know, he knew everybody. And I was there for, you know, hours, the formality. My father wanted this formality of you will shake everyone's hand and hug everybody and accept every condolence that walks through that door. And I had no idea that it was going to be like, you know, I felt like I was doing like a press tour, like where I was covering, I was the one who needed condolences and help. And I was in this position of accepting, you know, accepting and watching, you know, human beings look at my brother and realizing what I had just had to break my own heart and realize over and over again. And it's so weird because at the time, I will never forget this, in that stream of, I'm sorry for your losses, this will get better, time heals all wounds, like in the stream of like just the stupid things we learn to say to each other, you know, with the best intentions. One person hugged me and grabbed me really close, and she said, "You're so screwed. This is going to take so long. You're so screwed. I'm so sorry." And I, for days after that, my brother's funeral, was so mad at that person. Like, who says that? And like, you know, because that person had experienced their own loss recently, you know, it was like they were making it about them. And why would you even say that to me? And it's so funny, 13 years later, as I put this book out, I'm like, I got to be the person that grabs people and squeezes them and says, hey, you're screwed. But like, there is a way, and it's an everyday thing. And, you know, like, it's going to take experimenting and being curious and compassionate. But yeah, like, this is the moment where you're learning, you know, the hard thing that we all learn and we all can't avoid learning. You know, if we live, if we be, eventually, you know, it means we won't be. And for some reason, we're wired to like shush, like you were saying, that thought from the day we're born until the day that we have to understand and learn that it's true, that it's irreversible, you know. And if I can do anything to make the first year of dealing with that moment just a little bit more possible for people, especially now that we are in this, you know, pandemic possible world where there's even more isolation, then yeah, I'm happy to kind of, you know, connect, and I hope a lot of the conversations that I get to have are like this. You know, we both almost got choked up at points. We both shared deeply personal things, but we did it in a way where it was from our own experience and wasn't putting, you know, grief knowledge onto anybody. And I'm just so glad that this was like the first conversation, because it's really kind of setting the note for me. And I mean, like I said, I just got the hardcover for the first time, so it just like it's real. It's taken a physical form. It's almost like we were saying with the energy of when someone's a physical form, but we're energetically attached. I'm in the opposite, where it's like a birth that now exists, and people are touching it and holding it and reviewing it and posting it, and I'm like, oh no, I had a baby and let it go right into the world. Like, this is very raw and vulnerable, and so I just like ask anybody that does gift it or that gets it for themselves. It's not necessarily for like, it doesn't have to be your real first year of grief. It can just be the first year that you're willing to start honoring the journey instead of fixing it. It is, you can also, every time in the book, it is sort of written for a physical death, but like we said, you can swap everything out with anything you've lost that's meaningful, anything that you're trying to process, and just remember that I'm that willing friend that's along for the ride. So I would love feedback. I would love to learn from anybody who reads this, from anyone who does experiments, what does and doesn't work for them. That's what I'm in this for. I'm definitely not in it to like be like, check, I figured out grief. You guys are all healed. You know, so there will never be a sad funeral again. That really, yeah, not my intention. And in fact, you know, my only selfish intention was that when people call me now because of what I've been through and ask me what they should do, that I could just offer something physically rather than sitting energetically with wanting so badly and empathetically to show up fully for people, but knowing that so much of it is going to be in them showing up for themselves. And being, so I keep using these words, but so kind and so self-compassionate and just curious in a healthy way, you know, about how you sort of tiptoe forward. But yeah, I'm back to being confused about who wraps this up, because we did that Inception thing. I'm hosting your show on mine,
Yeah.
but it's all gonna work out. So I'm gonna let you do whatever you normally do. And
Yeah. I just want to say thank you for coming on and doing this. I know that the first time we tried, we had to move it because of my seminar, and then I was like, no, this can't cancel again. So I'm glad the universe allowed you to go live and I could join that way. I think what you did was beautiful. Like, I can't wait to read the book. I ordered the hardcover, so it took longer to get here than had I ordered the paperback. But I love that you, first off, just say that this isn't a book to heal grief. This isn't one size fits all, which is impossible for anyone to ever think they can claim that for anything that they create. But I love that you are still willing to be a person that can help others through it. And I'm glad that you took the time to, like, it's definitely, I would not say selfish to say, hey, I've been through tons of things and I want to share, but there's a way I can share that's not as earth shaking to me every single time I have to do this, because I definitely know the feeling, because if someone comes to you very quickly after something like that, like, you know what those intense moments felt like in that moment, and those all come back. It's like that whole energy like comes and just radiates through you again. The first time someone did that to me, my whole body shook, and I was reliving the trauma of losing my best friend in the car crash that he passed away in. So I think putting it in word, one, it's a journey for you, and it's a lesson that you learned in that process, because I don't think people realize that writing something down in a book form requires you to think through things and it makes sense to yourself enough to put on a page. Whereas before, if it's only floating in your head forever, like if you don't verbally say it or write it down, you miss out on an experience of understanding yourself a little bit deeper, because it's very confusing in here, because it's like one thought pierces another thought and they're all trying
I'm
to
so
find.
glad you said that. I knew you haven't gone yet, but I actually leave throughout the book gray space, I call it, and living in the gray space. And I purposely made it gray because, like in grief, you know, it's not meant to be black or white, and you don't even have to write it down if it's private, but it's just an indication to spend some time in that gray space of grief where nothing's defined. You're just working through the honoring of this moment. And before we end, I do want to say too that, you know, I've gotten a lot of DMs from people who have, you know, I know there are a lot of people who have really struggled through the pandemic and whatnot. And if the paperback or the hard copy is not affordable to you, I didn't want it to exist on Kindle because it is just meant to be something in physical form for when we lose something, you know, in physical form, and to live with you. But it does exist on Kindle, and I am keeping it right now just at 99 cents there. But also, if you go to my page, you can text the Grief Club number and get completely free texts from me, just like little reminders, little, you know, nudges and offerings to kind of get you started there. And most likely for my brother's birthday, I'll do another completely free day. So anybody that, you know, needs a copy that that maybe can't afford it right now, or the cost doesn't align with them, you know, you know, hopefully we're all turning up our frequency for wealth, but you know, our circumstances are, and I just want to make sure that everyone knows that it is available to them in some form, and that is something that yeah, I wanted to make sure. So I think it's mygriefclub.com. This is the first time I'm doing this, so I am using my own Instagram, mygriefclub.com, or you can email share@mygriefclub.com. And I'm just always willing to hear. Like I said, like I'm just in the arena too, the guy across the way waving. And I'd love to hear what, you know, what's worked for people and what hasn't, and how they're honoring their grief and finding their way forward. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. We will figure out the digital switchback of giving this back to you, so that it is your interview and it exists with all the other amazing talks you do. Also, huge kudos to you, man. Like I you know, spent half my time in LA, and it's the land of I'm going to do this, and you have been having these talks consistently and empathetically and beautifully, I've witnessed for, you know, so long now and so many episodes. So I just want to say, like, congratulations. And you know, I noticed that, and it's badass that you just keep showing up, and it makes me, there's a reason that this interview happened so late, because sometimes when you go to show up, you get a little scared and paralyzed, and I know I did. It really was like this raw opening of this book existing was like a baby I couldn't protect in the world, and it got stuck for a minute. So I'm so glad that the first time I have like officially talked about it was with somebody I trust, and that, you know, has championed me in the past before with trying to make a little impact from the darkness. So thank you so much, man.
No problem. And I'll always be here for that. And if there's ever any time that you need to reach out to me, feel free to do that. Anyone listening, same thing. I live a very busy life, but I always make time for people I believe in, and keep going.
Thank you, man. Also, I can hear my like book team screaming at me, being like, "Tell them it's available on Amazon." Also, too, I am such a big supporter of small bookshops. If anybody here is connected to anybody with like that owns a small bookshop, I would love to either donate or work out a really great deal just for the book to exist in, you know, those smaller mom and pop shops, because I know they took a hard hit during the pandemic, and that's something I'm really passionate about. All right, I know we can both talk forever, so I'm just gonna say thank you, and I hope this saves, and you know, we get it out there.
Sounds good to me.
Thank you, buddy. I'll talk to you.
Bye.